In this video, I'm going to talk about the most powerful tool there is for finding out what the visitors to your website actually want. It's the second part of a presentation which I made to the clients of Screen Pages in September 2010. We'll now move on to the section which I think is the most important. This is my most powerful tool. This is my Desert Island Disk tool. If I had to choose one source of data for analysing what goes on sites, it wouldn't be Google Analytics, it wouldn't even be user testing videos, it would be user surveys. In particular, I would go for these things. This is my favourite source of information. It's a very small, short survey embedded in the thank you page of an e-commerce site. Some people will suggest that this is going to give you a very skewed result, and that because you're only surveying people who've completed a purchase, you aren't going to hear about problems which prevent people making a purchase. All I can say is I analyse more than 1,000 of these every week, and we've been doing it for 5 years, and I can assure you that you get to hear about plenty of problems that would have stopped somebody buying. They come back on another session and buy again, or they tell you about something that happened on a previous experience. You get plenty of insight this way. And the reason I think these are so valuable and so important is that this type of survey happens after the purchase, so there is absolutely no way you are distracting from the key purpose of the site, which is to sell things. So my tip on these ones with the embedded surveys is the key thing is to keep them very, very short. Only ask 3 or 4 questions and 1 text comment. The questions can be pretty much anything that you think is appropriate. A lot of people go for the one, and I recommend it, which is the Net Promoter Score, where you ask that question is about how likely is it that you would recommend our company to a friend or colleague. And then you take the top 2 scores, the sort of score on a score of 0 to 10, the top 2, 9 and 10s, and call them promoters. You take the bottom, I think it is 6, and call those detractors, and you ignore the middle. And then you subtract the detractors from the promoters to get your overall score as a benchmark, and you measure whether you can get it to go up or down. But the real important question, as far as I'm concerned, on all these surveys is the any other comments one, the free text space in which you allow people to say whatever they want. And please don't skew it in any way. Don't make it sort of any suggestions or anything. Keep it as neutral as possible so that people tell you whatever comes to mind. Here are a couple of suppliers that you can go to for this. There are specialist companies who do very, very sophisticated feedback and surveying tools which cost a lot of money and do wonderful things. But at our level, what I'm suggesting you get started with is just go to either of the obvious candidates for supplying survey systems, which are SurveyMonkey and SurveyGizmo, and sign up with those and get a survey embedded in your thank you page as soon as you can. It used to be that SurveyGizmo were better at doing embedded embedded surveys, but I think SurveyMonkey is pretty much as good as them these days, so I don't think there's much to choose between them. Either will do, just the main point is to get going on it. The other type of survey that you might want to consider are the ones which are present throughout the entire customer journey but are much more discreet. They take a form of, maybe like on the left hand side of the page you're seeing Campile, which has a little tab that floats up and down on the right hand side, or a corner, bottom right corner. That's quite a common place to have their survey system in place. On the right hand side there's an example from a new system which I rather like the look of, which is called KISS Insights, for Keep It Simple. And they do it really simply. Instead of you having to click something which then produces an overlay with a sort of multiple question survey, they just do the whole thing in one little bit that pops up at the bottom of the screen. So I rather like that one, though I don't actually have much practical experience of it yet. The main point about these things is to keep them as unintrusive as possible. And I'm showing there the configuration screen from KISS Insights. So you can have it configured so that it only shows the invitation to somebody who's already seen several pages, so it doesn't distract people at first. Or you could have it so that it only shows the invitation if somebody's been on a particular page for a considerable amount of time. So again, it's a reasonable time. The page has had time to perform its normal function, and you try and solicit some information. Compile have a really neat bit of script that basically tracks the mouse movement, and if the cursor heads towards the top left of the screen, they interpret this as signifying that you might be going for the back button, and they'll pop a survey invitation up at that point. So that's worth considering. These are the suppliers of that type of continuous feedback system. There's Compile that I mentioned. They've been around a long time, do a good integration with Google Analytics. Kiss Insights is the new one, which I think is well worth a look because I really like the simplicity of their approach. I'm also mentioning their 4Q, which is the one that analytics guru Avanish Kaushik did in conjunction with one of the big, expensive, paid-for system suppliers. The reason I haven't talked much about that one is that I personally find that the invitation screen for that one is too big. It's too intrusive. You can turn it down until it only surveys, say, 1 in 10 or even 1 in 100 of the visitors to your site, but it still floats a great big overlay right over the whole site. And I think that's really just not a good idea because you're getting in the way of what the customer's there to do. If you have these systems, by the way, of course, don't forget with SurveyMonkey and SurveyGizmo, you can do loads and loads of ordinary surveys, all manner of surveys. And one of the ones I'd suggest you might consider doing is emailing out an invitation to everyone 2 weeks after they've placed their order to check that the delivery went okay and get some feedback at that point. But the really important thing that I think we need to be talking about is not so much how you get the information as what you do with it. Because the thing here is analysis is the absolute key part of this process. If you just skim through the comments, then you're going to not get the full benefit out of this. The full benefit out of this stuff comes with the analysing and the getting of the insight, and you need to formalize that process. So I would suggest that you consider this as a sort of 3-part stage. There is the tagging, according to basically deciding what the themes are. What are these comments about? The sentiment, are they positive or negative? You then trend that over time so you can see where things are getting hot and where things are getting better. And what's more, you then take all that information and produce a regular report and analysing it, I'd say on a weekly or monthly basis, and including in that the action points of what your customers, what this feedback is suggesting that it should be done, what's wrong with the site, how to fix it, what could be done to improve it. So just doing mental word clouds or even physical word clouds isn't going to be enough. Though, since we're on the subject of word clouds, here's an example of the type of output that you'd get from one. This is taking a load of positive comments from a site and cutting and pasting them out of an export and putting them into a site called wordle.net, and it comes up with this. Now, one of the things that I'll mention at this point about these things is that people are extremely generous. They will tell you lots and lots of things. They're very kind about your site, and it's quite easy to get 50% of comments being positive. That's a great reason to take heart. But let's look at the negative. Now, you may think that this looks rather similar because, there's some obvious things that people might be complaining about, like delivery and time and code. That'll be offer codes and voucher codes, and password and address. But there's also good and please and products. The interesting thing here is that even when people are being negative, they're also very generous and helpful. So what you will find there is those will probably reflect people saying things like, this didn't work, I think it would be a good idea if you did that. I couldn't find this, it would be good if you called it that. Or please could you try this? And the other very significant thing that you'll find is that people will suggest products that they think you ought to be selling that you don't sell at the moment. This is an amazing source of market insight. This kind of market research you would pay a lot of money for elsewhere. A whole load of people who are clearly in your demographic, they're right spot on in your market, are suggesting products that you should stock. That is a great source of insight. But as I was saying, I think the real benefit of this system is if you formally analyze it. So I'm just going to show you the system that we use for doing so. This is our in-house system. On the left, suitably obscured, there are some comments from the customers. In the middle are a load of checkboxes. And what we do is in the first few weeks that we're working on a site, we run through all the comments and basically build up a list of what we think the key themes that keep cropping up are. And we then configure them in this system so that we can just click a checkbox to record that the comments about that. Over on the right, we've got a box for follow-up, because one of the important things here to know is that the people will quite often actually expect a response from you, and even people who don't actually specifically ask for a response quite often deserve one. So you need to have a facility to export these, send them off to the call center, and get somebody to get in touch with the customer and explain what's going on. There's also a box there for the product feed, because again, as I mentioned, up to about 10% of these comments may well be suggestions for products in my experience. Therefore, you need a facility for doing some specific extract to send information off to the product development team. You then need to do a sentiment score. Is it positive? Is it neutral? Or is it negative? Now, once you've got that data, you can take, for example, all the negative comments and export them, stick the numbers into Excel, calculate what the percentage that they are of all the negative comments, and then basically you can trend over time over what's attracting heat and what's cooling off, what's getting good. In this example, the way we do it is we use conditional formatting in Excel to basically show the hot spots and the cool spots, so we can spot where there are problems. We do a more extreme version of this, where we're just highlighting the cells where the negative comments have increased by more than one standard deviation from the average. In other words, this isn't just normal variation, this is something is seriously wrong there. We need to go and have a look at it in some detail. And again, what you do in that situation is you then go and look at all the survey comments that are about that category and see what they're about, because the chances are people are telling you something fairly specific. Having got all that information, I'm saying you should then take it slightly further. You should actually produce a very short, I'd suggest 1 or 2 pages maximum, little document every week or every month reporting on this. So what I would include in that is descriptions of the issues that have cropped up. The key point is those action points about how we think they could be fixed. Maybe a couple of charts showing the sentiment over time and the share of the negative comments compared to what is the average for each of those categories. But the main point is those action points. I'd also stick in some sample comments so that anybody who sees this can actually get a flavour of the voice and the language that the customer uses. I'd also, of course, separately do that export for the product development team. And then there's the thing called the cheers file. Now, the positive comments have 2 uses in this world that I can think of. One is we circulate them as a morale building exercise. But the other thing is you need to analyze those as well, because what you're looking at there is what your customers actually think are your strengths, your strong selling points, and they may not be the same as the same things that you consider to be your strengths. So on the basis of that, you should consider changing your marketing messages and your language on your site to make sure that you are actually emphasizing the things that the people who actually buy from you really think are important, not necessarily the same things that you think are important. So again, that's yet another example of the actual insights, specific insights you can get from this kind of work. In the final part of this series, I'll show you some of the things that you can do with one of the tools that's actually already on your site, almost certainly, and I'll also share some ideas about how you can go and listen to people before they get to your site.